Hello, everyone. I'm Jason Fierno, representing the Mining Mavericks. The Mining Mavericks are a curated group of industry leaders who are passionate about making the industry better and more sustainable for everyone. Today, I'm fortunate enough to be joined by Dr. Andrew Downard. Dr. Downard is currently the principal of CI Advisory. Welcome, Doctor. How you doing?
Yeah, good. Thank you, Jason.
Perfect. So, Doctor, you began your career with General Motors Holden and have held various positions within Kenworth Trucks, Nissan Australia, before what I understand, kind of moving more into the supply chain industry, supply chain of things. You've also worked with companies like Allied Signal, Honeywell, 80 Supply Chain Group, and then SCRT, which is something that you'll have to educate me on because I haven't heard of that. But now you're focused on collaboration, not only at CI Advisory, but the University of Tennessee. Did we get that close?
I guess that's the 50 Cent tour around my career. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. Well, I appreciate that it's early for you in the morning. So you've got your CI advisory that you run out of Australia, yet you're also a professor at the University of Tennessee. Maybe you could give us a bit of contextual background to how that doesn't make you work 24 hours a day.
Well, I'm sort of an adjunct faculty at the University of Tennessee, and I help Kate Vatasic and the vested faculty when there's teaching to be done in the Asia Pacific region. So we'll do courses and programs. It might be in the in Saudi Arabia or in Hong Kong or Australia or somewhere like that. So that means I can still happily be sitting here in Australia and teaching people in the region.
Okay.
And so that's that part of it. CI Advisory is an organisation I set up to basically help people. So CI is collaborative impact. And so what we seek to do is to help people to collaborate properly. People are kind of hardwired by evolution to collaborate. That's how, we got to be the smart monkeys. So it's natural for us to collaborate because it's in our nature. But we've managed over the years to confuse ourselves, and we think that being competitive is a better way to get what we want, which isn't necessarily the case. So we help people to collaborate properly.
I love that. I totally agree with you. I mean, I think instinctually we as humans have evolved through collaboration. There's no question about that. So I agree with that. Is there aspects of your teaching or aspects of your study that goes to the science behind that, or is it general observation? I mean, maybe a bit more there.
Certainly we look at the behavioral economics side of things, when we're developing the vested model. But of course we go behind it. We look at what the Nobel Prize winning economists, Oliver Williamson, Oliver Hart, and those sorts of people are doing in terms of telling us the way that things actually sort of happen and why it's economically sensible to do what we're doing. But we do also spend some time going back and looking at those, why the behavior is there. For instance, if I trust you in some way, you get a release of oxytocin, which is the, your own body's pleasure drug.
Right.
But interestingly, when I trust you, I also get a burst of oxytocin. So that's that whole evolutionary thing that, guides us towards the path of trusting and collaboration.
And on the flip side of that, if I understand it correctly, if I don't trust you, if I'm scared of you, I get a negative endorphin release that
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, yeah,
causes me to
yeah.
turn and run around the
That's right.
block.
That's runaway, that flight. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think that I think fundamentally, while it sounds relatively simple in conversation, at least it does to me right here in this moment, I think my observation is that that's not always well understood by the masses. Is that consistent with your observation as well?
Yeah, I guess when you think of many of the very senior leaders in organizations, and this is changing a little over time now, but they came up in the economic conditions after the Second World War. Everything was growing. People were, the way to get what you wanted was through, competition and trying to make sure that you drove a hard bargain, because that was the way the economy was. They're now in the senior leadership positions, and they're trying to sort of impose what made them successful, in the 60s and 70s on business today, where there's probably more scarcity today, in fact, than there was then. And you need to collaborate to get what you need for your organization. So, that's kind of imposed that situation on businesses. They've been led from the top to be adversarial, to fight. Whereas, the people that are coming up into the leadership of organizations now understand that collaboration is actually a better approach to get what you want.
Yeah, no, I think that's a really sound observation, and I would tend to agree. I'm happy to hear you. I'm encouraged to hear you say that you see the new generation and new generations of leadership that are looking at things a little bit, not, I mean, eyes wide open maybe, but a willingness to evaluate things from a collaborative standpoint. So that's that's encouraging for sure. But I will say, for me, my personal experience, at least within the mining and metal space, capital projects of mining and metals, there are fewer people that believe in collaboration that I've come across than there are people that are willing to kind of have these adversarial competition type relationships. Recognizing that mining is one of the industries you serve, where would you say, some of the other major industries that you play in are on that spectrum of, say, collaborative to adversarial?
I think probably if you look at organizations that are providing services,
Hmm.
They do recognize that collaboration is a better way to go. If you think about facilities management, for instance,
Okay.
there's been a real success stories in that space, with large organizations that are looking at the point of view that, hey, we're an accounting business, we're a big corporation. We don't want to waste our time on managing our buildings. So, let's get the big players, James Lang LaSalle, CBRE, Cushman Wakefield, those service providers then come in and do the work for them. And, it's probably a service that's not really well defined. So
Sure.
the best way to get everybody what they need, profit and, good service is to collaborate. And so that has been a space that's worked well. The logistics is another area which is really gets it. But what we have found is that big projects, there's been some breakthroughs in terms of big projects like, tunnels or, airfield extensions, maintaining the dikes in Holland, is an example where these sorts of ideas have broken through. But, the problem is the stakeholders in big projects, if it's sort of tunnels or roads or rail, tend to be very risk adverse. And so, they want to see everything completely defined right up front, and make sure they understand what they're getting for their dollar. And I guess that's the same problem that mining has, that, people who are doing a major project in the mining or minerals area, they're betting with big bucks. And so that risk aversion comes in.
No, I think that's exactly right. I think that's exactly right. And you hit on something that I want to explore a bit more, and that's the idea of trust and creating trust. Because I mean, from my standpoint, can't have collaboration if you don't have trust. So what, in your opinion, like what are the key criteria, or how would you teach as an expert in the field an ability to create trust, how to create trust maybe quickly? What are some of the components of that you could impart on us that would be, valuable for us and helpful for us?
I guess the when we're helping people put together a collaborative deal, the very, very first thing we start out with is understanding the relationship and trust. So, we will spend time working on what's the vision for this, new arrangement that you're putting in place. What are the guiding principles that are going to apply? What are the intended behaviors? And we do that before we start talking about, so what's the scope of what we're dealing with here? And very much working on the relationship before you start talking dollars and cents. And often what we'll do is we'll sit down with them and we'll get them to do a compatibility and trust assessment of their relationship, so that they understand, where we are now, where are we starting from, before we then start working on the deal. And by working with people in that way, by putting relationship first and then moving into the details of the contract or the agreement, we're teaching them to trust each other. And you're learning that the trust you can have in your partner by working together on something. So it's not a case of just naturally assuming people can step in and trust each other. You've got to actually give them tangible experience that helps them to trust.
I like that. That makes sense. So for context, what would be the nature of your involvement? I mean, what would be, not the nature of your involvement, let me say that a different way. So when you start building these relationships, I'm assuming between a couple of different parties, is there an economic interest involved, or, how does that even come to fruition?
Yeah. So, CI advisory helps people by facilitating and coaching them to put together a good deal, using the vested methodology. And generally speaking, what we do is that we're paid equally by both parties.
Okay.
So what we tend to say is that we work for the deal,
sure,
not for the buyer and not for the seller. So that enables us to be an independent third party who looks at the way the parties are working together, coaches and facilitates them towards the goal that they're setting themselves, without being particularly beholden to one or other of the parties. So we're trying to get them to be the best they can be in terms of, collaborating.
I think that's really smart. That's interesting. That puts a smile on my face. I like that. I could see how that would be beneficial to the process in terms of coming up with the best deal. You're not biased. You're not swayed by whether or not you can put food on the table tomorrow based on one person's agenda or objective. So with that, if I could, I'm asking for clarification and understanding. If you have two parties, say it's two 50-50, what's the common thread between the two of them that they want to have that facilitation, that collaborative relationship?
Uh, Usually it will be a case that they have identified in advance that they want to work together on a particular deal or project or whatever. And what they've recognized is that there is a great opportunity if they collaborate and do it right. And so we talk about there's got to be a pony, there's got to be a payoff in terms of the if we collaborate, we're going to get more than if we just go down a transactional path.
Sure.
And sometimes we do sometimes work with people where they say, we've got a project, but we don't have a partner, we don't have a service provider or a supplier. How do we go to market without damaging the future relationship? The problem is if you go out and do a request for tender or something along those lines and create that competitive pressure, that can often damage the future relationship because people have had to give away more than they perhaps wanted to.
Sure.
And they spend the 5 years of the project or whatever trying to claw back the stuff they gave away to win the tender.
Sure.
Which isn't what you want people focusing on. So we work with people to go out and use a request for partner approach, we call it. So we help them go out and find the partner first, then work out the deal later.
I like that. I'm smiling because I'm running through application in my mind for a lot of what we do for our clients, and that is exactly as you suggested, to go out with a request for tender or request for proposal, whatever it may be, but with the intentions of trying to not be adversarial and to be collaborative. But I absolutely understand your point that may not be the most optimum way to have an initial engagement. So I'm going to ask you a couple of questions around your request for partner because I'm curious, and I think it's a really novel idea. What would be the type of evaluation criteria within that request for partner so that I'm getting the best partner for this circumstance? Like, what are some of the things that you look at within that context?
So in simple terms, we go through a number of stages. The first stage is to write up a tender document, if you like, which talks as much about the intended relationship that the buyer is looking for as it does about the subject matter of we want to build a bridge, or we want to build a freeway, or set up a mining operation. And that process goes to the market and gathers a big field of people. We would then educate them in collaboration, excuse me,
Of course.
and the vested model. We would then go through what we call a couple of dialogues. So the first dialogue is sitting down with qualified people, and there might be 6, a dozen, depends on how many players there are, and we get them to work together on how they might form the relationship.
Okay.
Going through that process, we can evaluate who is the best fit. And so what we will do at that stage is shortlist down to a smaller number of people, where we'll get into more detail about how they might approach the project and how they might approach the relationship. What we'll do then is, and normally what we try and do is get down to the chosen partner and start to work on really identifying the detail of how they would do the project and delve deeper into the relationship. So it's really a sort of a funneling down to finding the partner and starting to work on the detail of the deal. And because of the work that you've done in the earlier stages, you've started to work on that vision, guiding principles, intended behaviors as you've gone through. So you're already sort of hitting the ground running when you start to negotiate the actual contract.
Okay, so all of that is done in advance of any dollars and cents, cost, price, stuff like that.
Yeah, so the dollars and cents, the actual sort of that part of the proposal is developed after that sort of final stage of working together on developing the scope of the project.
Okay. Okay. Makes sense. And I could see how that would be a really valuable process and exercise. I'm going to play devil's advocate only because I know that this is what people would say to me. Like, yeah, but that's going to take a lot of time. And we've committed to this deadline to having production at this point or having our project complete at this point. If we do that, it's going to take us a bunch more time. What do you say to naysayers that throw that one at you?
I think the answer to that is that, investing up front in the relationship saves you time in the implementation. So if you work around the old way, where you as the customer develop a detailed scope for the project, which you then get proposals against, you then get into implementation to find that actually the reason you aren't doing the project yourself is because you've got somebody else in who's an expert. And then you have this circular process where they say, actually, your scope's wrong here. You can't put that there. You've got to put it over there. So you're losing time in implementation. If you follow our approach, yes, it may take a little longer before you actually start, sticking, the machines in and digging the first holes and that sort of stuff. But when you start, everybody's clear and you've got the right scope for what it is that you're trying to do. So implementation's faster.
Yeah, sure. Out of curiosity, I totally makes a lot of sense. Out of curiosity, do you track what your process looks like versus maybe what would be considered the typical or conventional process?
One of the things that we tried to do, so Vested has been developed by the researchers at the University of Tennessee, and we are a good combination, if you like, of the academic view of the Vested model and the implementation view. So the academic view says when we do these projects, we should do case studies so that we're able to show what it is that we achieved. And so if people go to www.vestedway.com, what they'll find there is a whole library of white papers and case studies that both describe the approach that we're taking, but also the results that we've gained, or rather the results that the people we've worked with have gained by implementing the collaborative model.
Definitely we'll check that out, and I'll make sure me and the team have that linked up in the show notes. If there was one result that sticks out in your mind, or one implementation that sticks out in your mind of being, I don't know, best case or something, what would be a statistic or a result that you could share with us today that, is significant in your mind?
It's it's hard to really latch on to a particular statistic.
Sure.
We've had organizations that have reduced their costs by over 20% by doing a deal like this. I did a deal in India for a Fortune 500 technology company, which was 24 million square feet of office space. So they had buildings and campuses right across India.
Okay.
If you think about, your sort of nearest big city, and you've got the big tall skyscraper, it's probably about 50 of those big tall skyscrapers in size.
Wow, it's huge.
They had around about well over a dozen service providers across the country. We worked with them to get it down to 2, and they saved in the first 3 months $2 million just in a couple of months by implementing a vested deal. So there is money to be made there. Another example would be the bridge that fell down in the US. So having a mental blank at this time of the morning of the particular city, but the city was on 2 sides of a river, and during the rush hour the bridge fell down, and obviously connecting them, the 2 main parts of the city was critical. And so they sort of said, well, okay, we need to build this bridge quickly. Mm-hmm. And they basically followed the approach of using the vested model and collaborating with the bridge builder, rather than using, we'll go away and we'll develop the perfect scope of works, which you'll put a proposal in on. And they had that bridge built well in advance of their deadline. It was prize winning from an aesthetics point of view, and came in under budget. So that's one of the case studies that you can read about at the Vested Way website. So that's an example where, okay, so yes, they saved a bit of money, but they saved time, which was more important to them in that particular example.
Yeah, no, that's great. Thank you for sharing that. Just for clarification, it's vestedway.com?
Yes, so vestedway, .com. Yeah.
Okay, perfect. I just want to clarify that. I think it's really important. I think it's great that you're focused on the academia side of it as well as the implementation, because it's all great in theory until you actually, put it into application. At least that's a lot of the stuff that I hear. For full disclosure, I've said this on multiple occasions. I really believe that within mining and metals and other industries as well, that the collaborative contracting, collaborative model of building capital projects, while it's been implemented in some instances already, I see it as being a really strong contender for future projects that will help us from blowing out our budgets and schedule and everything that we've done so poorly over the years. So I think having a resource like the Vested Way, where people can see actual case studies of what the results are really important, because not everybody agrees with me. So it's nice to have that science behind it as well. So thank you for that. So what you've mentioned the Vested Way, the Vested methodology, the Vested model. What are the primary principles of Vested?
So the Vested model grew out of research that the United States Air Force asked the University of Tennessee to conduct. So the US Air Force had developed a performance-based logistics model where they had basically were sort of contracts that were sort of outcomes based, and some of them worked really, really well, and some of them were absolute horror stories. And they was going, please tell us why, why are they all sort of, wonderful? How come some of them don't work? And so what the researchers, Kate Potasic, as the lead researcher, found was that the ones that worked followed 5 basic rules. And the rules were that the contract basically focused on outcomes. So, that was the key thing. So rather than focused on, follow the scope of works, it was they were looking to achieve an outcome. The second was that it was about the contract talking about the what, not the how. So rather than trying to describe in detail how the work is to be done, they would describe, what was required or what the contract should deliver. Even though it was, it's relational, and the first part of it sounds sort of very feely touchy. The contracts that worked made sure that there were strong measurement of those outcomes, so that it wasn't just floating away there and sort of sitting in a circle and singing Kumbaya. It was right. There were performance measures in place on the outcomes. The fourth rule was that they had a pricing model that incentivized performance, and so it was in the interests of the service provider or the manufacturer to perform better and give the customer more of what they wanted, because they would be incentivized to do so. And then the final rule 5, was that there were governance processes in place which looked at insight versus oversight. So all too often when you get a traditional contract is put in place and it has governance processes where the two parties spend most of their time trying to manage the other party and not manage the business. So the fifth rule gets people both looking at managing the business rather than each other. So the good deals were following those 5 rules, and what we've now developed in the Vested model is a way of developing agreements and contracts that follow the 5 rules.
Gotcha. For clarity, Dr. Downard, the third of the 5 is that the measurement component?
Yes. So the third rule is measurement. Yeah.
Okay. just taking notes. This is all really good
And
stuff.
and as I say, if you go to our Vested Way website, the University of Tennessee site, you'll see all of the materials there around about the 5 rules, and a good collaborative contract has 10 elements, and what we've done over the years is develop the content of the 10 elements of a good vested or relational contract.
Gotcha. Okay. Well, yeah, definitely we'll check that out and make sure we've got that so people can see it. What you're saying in my mind makes a lot of sense, and it's certainly consistent with what I'm telling our clients in terms of a better way of doing business. Having said that, recognizing that you're in supply chain, my background is also supply chain based, or started there. So much of the focus, at least within mining, I'm going on an assumption that other industries are the same, but there's been a paradigm shift within the last, I don't know, 10, 15 years, where supply chain has been, in my opinion, very focused on cost. Like, what is the price? How do we get cost savings? How do we take $100 widget and make it a $90 widget so we can put 10 more dollars in our pocket? What do you say to counteract that desire and drive for, quote unquote, cost savings?
I think the key thing that I would always say to people, if they overly focus on cost savings, is that you're kind of missing the point. What you're trying to do, if you think about the procurement function, the role of procurement is to add first value to the work that the organization does. So it doesn't matter how efficient your factory is in terms of following all the lean principles and those sorts of things. If your purchasing department does a bad job of buying the raw materials or whatever compared with their peers in the marketplace, then all your efficient factory is doing is trying to catch up the value that's been lost by procurement. So if procurement does a good job, they're giving the efficient factory a head start in terms of the role of the business, which is to add value to the inputs that they take and then sell it at a profit to customers.
I couldn't agree more. I know my experience is that that's not the norm. It's certainly not the norm that I've seen, at least the way that the pendulum has shifted today. And we're advocates for swinging it back the other way, because I totally agree. It should be about value. What value can you create? I like the idea and the analogy of giving your factory a head start. That's a good one, something that I'm probably going to steal and use. But I imagine there are times when you're sitting in a meeting room with the procurement professionals that you're not the most popular guy in the room. Is that true? Or do you get embraced, do you think?
I like to think that there's a fair amount of embracing sort of happening there,
Sure.
because a lot of procurement people recognize that when they're going and being ultra competitive and really sort of driving their suppliers hard, they know they're making a rod for their own back. So taking it back to behavioral economics again, and we spend a lot of time looking at what the Nobel Prize winning economists have been saying about the right way to collaborate and do business. And Oliver Hart, who's worked with us at in the vested ecosystem, won the Nobel Prize for looking at the issue about, where contracts are incomplete and the supplier or the service provider feels that they've been hard done by, if you like, as part of the process. Excuse me. What they'll do is what Oliver Hart calls shading. So they'll try and they might not use their best people. They might not focus fully on quality, and they will try and shift the dial back their way by following the letter of the contract, but not the intent. And so he did his work, which won the Nobel Prize, by working on that and showing that it is in fact true that shading occurs under those circumstances. And he actually has written a Harvard Business Review article with a couple of people, including Kate Batasic, identifying the relational contracting approach as being a way of preventing shading from happening.
Well, that's excellent. I will absolutely be sure to check that out. I can say that in my experience, being in this industry for 20 years, it's certainly the case in every circumstance that I can think of in any project that I've been involved, that there is that, what you're referring to as shading. But when it is open and collaborative and there's an element of trust, it's just the cost goes down and speed goes up. I mean, frankly.
That's right. That's right. And the while the finance, people might tell procurement your job is to save money, the rest of the business is saying, hey, Mr. Procurement, your job is to get us continuity of supply.
Absolutely.
And so it depends which, and this is you got to feel for procurement people. They've got more bosses than you can shake a stick at.
It's fair.
And it kind of depends which boss do they listen to.
That's true. Yeah, that's true. All really, really good stuff. And I want to be sensitive of your time. I mean, I think this is great and is very insightful, I think. And I certainly appreciate that. I'm sure our listeners will appreciate that as well. And I know there's some really valuable nuggets in there that we can go back as listeners and myself and do some additional homework on. So thank you for those resources.
Is that a mining segue?
Well, normally normally what we ask our guests that as we wrap up is, where do you want to see the mining industry in 10 years and where do you think it will be? But in this context, recognizing that your scope of expertise is more broad than that, the question that I want to ask you is, where do you see the future of collaborative contracting in the next 10 years?
I think it certainly has been growing and becoming recognized as a better way to do business. Over the last 5-10 years, it's been growing. I think as people see the results, because it's that whole risk aversion thing.
Right.
If other people have done it and it's worked, then maybe we can.
You get that.
I think it's going to grow. And when you think of the work that governments are starting to do in terms of big infrastructure projects, they're starting to recognize that the old way isn't getting them the best results. And so legislation's been written to say that, yeah, you can actually consider value for money as one of the ways of thinking about how do we source this big project. And it allows people to say, what's going to get me the most value for the dollar that I spend, rather than what's the lowest possible cost I can pay. So, when governments start to recognize that, business should be way ahead of that point.
Yeah. So true. That's so true. Well, I think I would agree with you there. I think there is a recognition over recent history that there is a better way of doing business. I fully support what you're saying, and it makes me happy to hear you say that as well, because I see it and you see it, and I think that's really encouraging. So with that, before we sign off, again, it's very, very insightful. I really appreciate the knowledge base and you taking the time to share your experience and your research with us. Before we sign off, what's the best way for our listeners to get in contact with you, whether it's through the University of Tennessee or CI Advisory? If somebody wants to learn more, what's the best way to contact you, Dr. Downard?
So probably direct contact via email. So that would be andrew@ci-advisory.com.
Okay.
Or sort of message me on LinkedIn, Andrew Downard.
Perfect. Yeah, you're definitely active on LinkedIn. I know that. We talked about that before we started, that you're trying to add value to various industries. So appreciate that. Well, great. Thank you very much. I really appreciate you taking the time to chat with us. For those that don't know, it's 6 o'clock in the morning. He's got his long black and taking the time to educate us and chat with all of us. So there you go. So thank you very much.
It's been a pleasure.
Absolutely.